Red Bull have failed to meet the expectations of the fans in the past 3 races, and it could very well be an issue that we'll see frequently throughout the course of the 2024 season. However, the Austrian team identifying the weaknesses of the car is not something new. It has been present on their Challenger ever since 2022. But why do they struggle with it all of a sudden? And more importantly, what does it mean for the 2024 campaign of the Austrian team, given the steps taken from Ferrari and McLaren that are quite significant? It goes without saying that Red Bull have set a precedent with their performance that the rest of the grid cannot match, especially in 2023, when they won 21 out of the 22 venues the F1 Caravan raced on, setting the record of 95% winning percentage. Of course, that is all in the past, and in 2024 the Austrian team have already lost 3 races out of the first 8 events, with struggles expecting to continue on a large contingent of races in 2024 due to a fundamental issue that was revealed on the RB20. Paradoxically enough, this isn't a new issue. It has been present on the RB18 and the RB19, but the supremacy that Red Bull had compared to the rest of the grid, as well as the attributes of the car that were a lot stronger compared to the other challengers, meant that they were able to successfully mask this flaw of the car. But now that is quite visible. The ride height as well as the suspension of the car have been brought under a lot of scrutiny, especially with Red Bull chasing a new design that was kind of explored by Mercedes in the past 2 years and dubbed a failure. Although the zero-pod design of Red Bull is not the same as the one the Silver Arrows ran in 2022 and 2023, it does have a lot of similarities. And the ironic part is that the Austrian team was forced to chase this design due to the plateau they've reached with the RB19, eventually forcing themselves to build a car that will operate in a very small window. This is an issue that's been present with Mercedes, so it would be interesting to see what Red Bull has in store in order to fix it for the 2024 season. But where is this issue present the most? As we've been able to see in Monaco, the car is not able to ride through the curbs and bumps without triggering the instability, which is more or less caused by the ride height of the car as well as the stiff suspension. To further worsen things, Red Bull has reported an issue in terms of correlation issues, saying that they weren't able to participate in the curb issue as the simulator did not show that the car would have an issue with stability. This means that Red Bull's car is now no longer able to attack the curbs as their rivals, and when the track has a bumpy surface, the team will be forced to raise the ride height a little bit in order to avoid the porpoising and instability issues. Paradoxically enough, Red Bull were the only team that was able to run the car as low to the ground as possible without triggering the porpoising issue. But with the new design of the car, they won't be able to do so, and raising the ride height will only worsen things up for the team, as Helmut Marko went on to say, "Our car has a concept where we focused on the aerodynamic efficiency and we can't raise it off the ground to better handle the curbs without losing a lot of downforce. I believe we still have an advantage on the traditional circuits. If we're not ahead in Barcelona, then we will really have a problem. On circuits where we're not the most competitive, we can count on the Verstappen factor. He is in full form and makes the difference." Indeed, the aerodynamic balance of the car is the primary source of advantage that Red Bull had compared to the rest of the grid during this regulation era. However, with the massive steps that have been made by Ferrari and McLaren, it does seem like this advantage has vanished in just a couple of races. And if we're to make a proper analysis of Red Bull's suspension, it looks like Red Bull's redefining of the design makes a little bit of a worrying scenario for the Austrian squad. The team has used a pull rod layout at the front and a push rod layout at the rear ever since 2022, serving as motivation for the rest of the grid to follow this path with the exception of a couple of teams, Ferrari included. But this design, even though it has been optimized ever since it was first introduced to the car in 2022, goes to show that just because you can improve on something doesn't mean you will be miles ahead of the rest of the grid. While the improvements would be primarily focused on enhancing the suspension's kinematic performance, there is still room to refine this area in order to gain more aerodynamic performance and therefore enable more confidence in the drivers to address the current curb issue. But while the team was chasing this aerodynamic performance and advantage over the rest of the grid, it might have put them in a situation in which they had compromised some of the ride aspects of the car too much. Again, Red Bull's primary advantage lies in the complexity of their floor and the ride height, as they were able to create a lot of headaches with the complexity of their floor for their rivals. But right now, this might not help them at all. What the team needs to understand is a perfect operating window, which has been further shed down thanks to the implementation of the new design and removing around 80% of the existing sidepod area compared to 2022 and 2023. Thanks to balancing out losses in one area, which is the ride height, and gains in another one, which is the aerodynamic systemization of the car. It's quite a tricky situation, and for example, Mercedes were unable to find this perfect operating window, which is why they ditched the design at the end of the 2023 season. And now Red Bull is facing a challenge in which they need to slightly degrade the suspension's operating range in exchange for a significant aerodynamic gain. If they're able to pull this off, it would be inevitable that the advantage would be massive in front of their rivals. However, it's much easier said than done, especially if you're looking at Racing Bulls and how they are using the same suspension as Red Bull but aren't facing any of these issues. And the issues are not only with the car's design, they're also with the number of drivers that are able to extract every single drop of performance from the RB20. Perez has proven to be a liability in the last 3 races, not finishing the race in Monaco and being out of Q1 after a devastating qualifying issue, outperformed by both Racing Bulls and Logan Sargent. This goes to show that indeed Verstappen is the factor that Red Bull would be putting their entire hopes into. But with McLaren and Ferrari being very close behind and the Maranello team only 24 points behind Red Bull in general, the Austrian team will have a realistic challenge to at least keep the lead in this category. The Drivers' Championship isn't looking extremely good either, with Leclerc being 31 points behind, meaning that it would only be a 1v2 fight, whether that is McLaren or Ferrari, that will challenge Verstappen in a more regular manner, proving that strategy would be pivotal for an outsmarting race. The upcoming race in Montreal will certainly serve as a huge challenge for Red Bull, mostly because it's a place where curb riding will prove to be extremely important to extract as much performance as possible, especially during the qualifying process. The wall of the champions at the start-finish line might be a place that Verstappen and Perez will kiss a lot more than the rest of the grid, because they're not feeling extremely happy with the car when it hits the curbs. Not to mention the fact that Montreal's surface is quite bumpy, even though it was resurfaced for this year's event. As of now, the conclusion that we can draw is that the Red Bull's issues lie primarily in the combination of a higher downforce aero package that runs at lower speeds on bumpy circuits. And while Monaco exposed these issues to a great extent, it's not the first time that we've seen it. Remember the only race that Red Bull lost in 2023? Singapore has shown that Red Bull can be vulnerable, but the advantage that they had in front of the rest of the grid was astronomical, and it wasn't really entertaining at that time. However, with 1 to 2 tenths per second separating the first 5 drivers on the grid, it could very well mean that the pole position, as well as the race winner, would be determined by a small mistake, such as missing the braking point or entering the corner with a bit of a smaller speed compared to the rest of the cars. With this in mind, Red Bull would likely have to be forced to raise the ride height in order to avoid the instability issues, but with a great loss of downforce as a consequence and kicking the car out of what it believed to be somewhat of a good performing window, it would be effectively the 3rd fastest car behind McLaren and Ferrari on many weekends this season, Montreal included. All in all, an interesting season awaits us, and with Verstappen having massive competition ahead of him, the question that Red Bull needs to answer is whether they find themselves in deep issues before the beginning of the 2026 season, and is this fixable on circuits that prove to be much more challenging for the RB20? What do you think about the flaws of the 2024 version of the Red Bull's car? Let us know in the comments below, and once you do that, make sure to click on the video that's appearing on your screen right now.